Welcome to Bits and Pieces Quilting. Today we are doing the outer border on Future Cat's cat face block. So stay tuned. Hi, I'm Michelle, and today we are putting the outer border on Future Cat's cat face block. We are building on the inner border that Kelly designed, and then we'll finish out the block with the border that I've designed here. There's a little bit of a scrappy element to it for those who are interested in string piecing, but there's also options for those who don't save their strings. So I hope you'll stick with me and let's dive right in. So this is the final border that I've designed for the community round robin. This started with Future Cat's center cat face block, then followed on from this churn dash style border that Kelly designed to go around Future Cat's block. And now it's my job to add the final border. And for all of us, the final borders in some way are the most challenging because in the rules that we set for this round robin, the final blocks need to finish at 20.5 inches square. So I had to take Kelly's math, where her block finished, and figure out what I could add to the quilt block to end up at 20.5 inches square, so that these will then be the final blocks to go into the final project. So this is my blue and yellow one, and I love the way this turned out, and I wanted to show you this one first because it turned out really well. And we're going to talk about the first one that I did that didn't turn out well, because I am going to demonstrate how to do this border in a way that's a little bit different from the way the pattern is written, and I'll explain why. The pattern is going to have all of the proper math. But I have discovered in this project that my piecing skills aren't anywhere near as good as I hoped that they would be. And I think as you start with the center and you add pieces and pieces and pieces and pieces and pieces and pieces, and when you finally get out to here, any little things that are off, any narrow seam allowances, any wide seam allowances, any narrow cutting, any wide cutting, any other problems all start to magnify as you work your way out to the outside edge. And so let me pull this one away. Look how beautiful it is. Admire the beauty, because now we're going to talk about the wavy block, which is this one. This one is going to have to get fixed over the course, I think, of this video. Can you see the difference? Well, I hope you can see the difference. I can really see the difference in real life. This block is all over the place. It is absolutely not square. It is absolutely not flat. It waves like crazy, and it's terrible. And what I did on this one is I triple checked the math, and I cut every piece exactly the width it was supposed to be and the length. And then I pulled and tugged and shoved and pushed and pulled and forced those pieces on. And this is the result. And it's a mess. And it's terrible. So I am going to definitely peel off this outer border. And unfortunately, I only had a fat quarter of this polka dot piece. So my outer border, my final border isn't actually going to be this fabric because I don't have enough of it. I don't have any more of it. I cut it all from my fat quarter to make this, and now I have no more. So I did find this other piece in my collection, and I think that's what I'm going to add to the outside border. I think I can salvage it to here, and I just need to do the outer borders differently to rescue this block, but we'll see how that goes. What this border consists of is a narrow inner border and a wider outer border of the same fabric. And then I have this piece of interest in here, and this is another scrap busting opportunity. For those of you who save your strings, this is a perfect opportunity to make string pieces. And for those of you who don't, there's a couple of different options. You can find a 1.5 inch solid fabric and add it in here. Or you could piece together a number of 1.5 inch squares and make this almost like a little checkerboard in here. Or you can take wider pieces and put them in here. You can cut them at random sizes and shapes. You can do whatever you want, but this is meant to be the focal point of this border. And so I was thrilled to be able to use these. I am not someone who saves my strings. It's just not something I have time or really the interest in doing. But every now and again, a line of fabric comes along, and I just can't bear to throw out the leftovers. I've had this sitting in my stash for years, probably 5 years or more. And these are all 10-inch pieces off of a bundle, or maybe, actually, I don't remember. I think they're 10. It doesn't matter. These are all pieces, though, that were from the same project, and they were all this about the same size, offcuts of about the same size. And I just couldn't bear to throw them away, but they were too small for what I normally save. They're all about an inch or an inch and a quarter wide. And so I don't know, I just wanted to push fabric under my machine one day. So I just started sewing them together and pressing it all nice and flat. And I wasn't ever really sure what I was going to do with it until this project came along. So in my failed block, you can see I've used it here. And I have enough here that I will use it in my third block. A few months ago, I was also working with some indigenous fabrics, and you may have seen these in some of my videos, some of my other videos. And these are also pieces that I just couldn't bear to throw away. These are also varying sizes. You can see some of these are wider than others. Some of these are really narrow. They all blend together beautifully, which is one of the reasons why I started sewing them together. But I couldn't bear to throw them out. So I had sewn them together into this long piece, and I had thought about maybe doing something with some zippers and making a zipper pouch out of it, or I wasn't really sure. But when this community round robin project came along, I thought, oh my gosh, this would be a super fun way to use these pieces. And so in the really good block, the block that turned out well, I used this indigenous fabric. And in some ways, it reads almost like a single piece of fabric, but it is a little cut from, from this, all different pieces all sewn into here. So choose your outside edge fabric and your inner border fabric. Decide how you're going to do this. And like I said, it can be strings, it can be 1.5 inch squares, it can be squares of a random size as long as you can trim it all down to be a 1.5 inch strip. It can just be a solid fabric. Choose what you want to do for this inner piece, and let's talk about how we're going to do this. So this is my third cat face block, and we are going to put an inner border, a pieced border, and then the outer border. And so based on the instructions for Kelly's border around the cat face block, this is supposed to finish at 11.5 inches. And this is part of the challenge about, this is why I'm going to teach this maybe a little bit differently than I would if all the measurements were perfect. Because if we measure this, it is very distinctly 11.25, maybe 11.25 and a smidge in a few places. It is not 11.5. And this is where I think I got into trouble with the last block by trying to stretch this to fit 11.5. So what I have done is I have cut these pieces 11.5, and I'm going to go take them over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew it carefully, but I'm going to let the machine just take it through. And if I have a little bit hanging over the edge, so be it. I will trim it off. I will hope that I have about the same amount hanging over the edge on both sides, and I will just trim it up. I have put the instructions into the pattern to cut these border pieces wider than necessary. Ultimately, we're going to square the block up to where it needs to be, and we're not going to fight the block to get it to the size it needs to be. So I'm going to go sew these two sides, give them a quick press, and then come back and talk about the long sides, and then we'll carry on with the second and third borders. So I've sewn this first border strip, and if you can see here in the bottom and here in the top, I appear to be consistently inconsistent, which is reassuring. So there's probably about a 1/4 inch, maybe a slightly bit less than a 1/4 inch hanging off the edge of both of these. This is telling me that despite them not being 11.5 inches long, the sides of my block are the same size. So I am still building a square. If one of these was dramatically longer or shorter than the other, then I would know that I had made some I had had some problems. I had made some mistakes deeper in the project. but this is telling me that I'm at least consistently inconsistent. So I am just going to quickly slice these off. I am not going to try and force this to size. I've learned my lesson. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the top and bottom borders. They're supposed to be 13.5 inches. I will cut them 13.5 inches, but this is definitely not going to be 13.5 inches. So let's see where we are. Yep, same as the other sides. This is about 13 1/4. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to hope that my my consistent inconsistencies are continuing, and we will put the top and bottom piece on here. So same story here. A little extra off this end, a little extra off that end. As I was pressing it though, I could tell that it was all still very nice and flat. So it's not the perfect size, but it is flat. And you know what? If it's not flat, you can call it fiber art. But if you're going to make a quilt, it really, really should be flat. So I'm just going to trim these pieces off again. And now we know our size is off, but we know that the block is on the right track. And so that's just going to have to be good enough. They're trash. The next step is to cut the inner pieced border. In my case, as I described earlier, I'm using up these something from nothing pieces that I made a long time ago. So let me show you how to cut those. This is the piece that I have made. I made a couple of these, which is where I got these first pieces from. But this was all just pressed nice and flat, sewn together, pressed, and now I'm going to just do my best to cut it. I need 3 more pieces. Actually, I'm just going to pop over to the iron and give this a quick hit. It's a little bit bumpy. All right, I'm back. You need to be really careful with things like this. This is super stretchy, so super malleable, but just try not to pull on anything. Line things up. I don't really care that these aren't straight. Some of that is because of the stretch in the fabric. Some of that is because my seam allowances are probably all over the place. Some of that is because some of the strips themselves may have been crooked. It's really hard to say. So I'm just going to do my best to cut a nice straight and square piece. And I need 3 of these that are 1.5 inches wide because I already have one right here. And these are going to be long enough to go around my block. So lining it up at 1.5 and giving it just a little zip, firmly and confidently cut across this because there's a lot of seam allowances here. And you know, I'm such that I am probably not going to throw away this leftover piece because I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it, but I still think it's really cool. We'll set that aside. These are my 4 pieces now. I am going to measure these and cut them to size. They are supposed to be 13.5 inches for the first sides and 15.5 inches for the second sides. But as we discovered with these first borders, that's probably not what's going to happen. But I'm going to just proceed the same way. Cut them the size they're supposed to be, sew them on, no pushing, no pulling, no stretching, and then trim off whatever is needed. Then give it a press, come back and do the long sides, same thing, cut them at 15.5 inches, sew them on, no pulling, no stretching, no pushing, and then give a trim wherever I need to. Then we'll talk about the final borders. I've got these fun pieced borders put on, and as expected, you can see these little pieces, I needed to trim a little bit. So these are the little pieces I trimmed off of the 4 borders as I was adding them. And so now we come to the final border. And this is intended to be a 3.5 inch border. But what I highly recommend you do if you have problems like this, like I have, is that you cut this at 4.5 inches. Then what we're going to do is we're going to sew it on. We're going to have a nice flat block, and then we're going to square it down to the size that we need. This was the best way I could figure out to help all of us get to the size we needed to be, bearing in mind whatever issues we each individually may have had to get to this stage in the first place. One thing I will point out, I have pressed these seams inside. I don't want to try and press backwards over top of these pieced bits. So I have pressed them both in towards this inner border, and that's laying nice and flat. And so the first piece for the outer border should be 15.5 inches. What I have here are 2 strips of fabric, width of fabric, 2 of them laying down here. And these are 4.5 rather than 3.5. If you are really confident in your sewing skills and really confident that you're going to be able to get this to work, then just cut your borders at 3.5 inches. I have discovered the hard way that I can't make it work. So this is the way I'm going to make it work. I've laid the 2 of them together because the next borders are going to have to be at least 21.5 inches when I cut them. 21.5 plus 21.5 is longer than a single width of fabric. So if I cut 15.5 inches off of each of these 2 pieces, then there will still be enough to cut the longer sides off of each of the 2 pieces. So it's just a really efficient way of using fabric. If I tried to cut 2 short sides out of one piece, that would be easy, but I wouldn't be able to cut 2 long pieces, 2 long sides out of one piece. So this way I make the best use of my fabric. So these are the 15.5 inch pieces. I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to try to sew them on. They're probably going to be about 1/4 inch, well, maybe even a little bit more than that by now, long. Trim them down, make sure that it's still nice and flat, and then cut the final borders to size, and then square the whole thing up. So I'll take you through all of that. As expected, these first pieces of this last round are probably 1/4 inch, or sorry, a 1/2 inch out. Yep, that's a 1/2 inch here and a 1/2 inch up here. Not unexpected. Further proof that this is the right way to go to get this to lay flat. So I will trim those off, and then I'm going to measure across the center of the project here, and this is 23 inches. If you recall, we are aiming for a 20.5 inch finished block. So we do have some that we need to trim off, but I'm going to cut my next pieces 23 inches because I know that they'll fit. I'm going to sew those on, and then I'm going to come back and show you how to square this up to the final size. In this case, for these pieces, I press these away from the pieced border, again, so that they lay nice and flat. I've zoomed you out a little bit because this block is so big, and I've taken away the light colored mat I normally film on, but here it is. This is the final block. Look how flat it is. I'm so happy at how flat it is, but it's not the right size. So we need to get it to the right size. It is supposed to be 20.5 inches square, because then the final block, when we sew it into the quilt, will be 20 inches square. So unless you have a ruler that's bigger than 20.5 inches, if you did, you could just put that down and trim it up and life is grand, but I don't have a ruler that big. So what do? How do you square something like this when you don't have a ruler that's big enough? Let me show you how. We are going to find the center of the block, and the easiest way for me to do that is to actually just fold it in half. But I'm not just going to fold it in half, I'm going to fold the design in half. So I know if I line up this edge and this edge, that's going to give me the center of my original square. So I'm just going to zoom in here. I'm going to take my fingers and I'm just going to put this so that it is lined up perfectly right there. Fold that over, and then just give this a gentle finger press. Just with my fingernail, I'm just going to finger press that. You may not be able to see it on camera, but I can very clearly see that little line across there. So I know that's the center in that direction. And I'm going to turn it, and I'm going to do exactly the same in the other direction. I'm going to just take this and line it up and fold it over, and then finger press right here. And because I can see that first press, I know exactly where I need to put this. So now I open this up, and again, I'm not sure you're going to be able to see it on camera, but I can see it really clearly where my little half mark is. And if I were to run that over to the iron and give that a quick press, that would just disappear completely. So now I know where the exact center of my block is. And so what is half of 20 and a half? Well, half of 20 and a half is 10 and a quarter. So I need to measure 10 and a quarter inches from here to the edge in order to trim. So I have a 5-inch ruler here, which means I need to set this ruler at 5 and a quarter on that perfect fold line right there, perfectly lined up, and I'm using any number of these seam lines to make sure that's square. 5 and a quarter, lined up square, tap this ruler up against that nice and tight. And so now I know that this is 10 and a quarter inches from the center, which will give me a 20 and a half finished block once I do this on all 4 sides. So I'm just going to zip this off. This may seem like a bit of waste, but I tried this with a 4-inch block and I found it was just a little too tight for comfort. So I would rather be trimming off a little more than necessary versus having it come up short or having to deal with the situation I showed you at the start of the video where my block was very clearly not square. So just double checking here, making sure everything is lined up nice and square and straight, and giving it a slice. Turning it again, lining it up at 5 and a quarter. And you know what? I'm just going to double check. Putting my ruler on here, 5 and a quarter. So from that edge to the edge should be 20 and a half. Perfect. Yay! Love it when a plan comes together. All right, line that up perfectly. Hold this ruler down firmly. Give that a slice. And then the final edge. And we're going to have a beautifully squared, perfectly sized block. And how wide are these outer borders in the end? They are 2 3/4. So, you know, I had hoped that they would be 3 inches. Actually, you know what? That's right, because I wanted them to be 3. I think I said 3 and a half at the beginning of the video, but I think I initially planned for them to be 3. This one's 3. This one's probably just 2 3/4. But you know what? The whole block is flat, which is my number 1 priority, and the final block is the right size. So all things considered, we're going to call this a win. I have actually pulled those wavy borders. Can I measure and cut and talk at the same time? I don't think I can. Hang on, bear with me. There we go. Sorry about that. All right. So that is a very well squared 20 and a half inch block. Makes me very happy. 20 and a half inch in multiple measurements, in multiple locations. It's exactly what we're looking for. Yay! So earlier, where did I put it? Here it is. Earlier, I pulled the offending wavy border off of this one, and I think I can save it to this stage. Let me bring my gray mat back, because I think if I put this down on the green mat, you won't be able to see it. Yeah, not very well. So here's the gray mat. So I've pulled those outer borders off. That was these ones here. Pulled those off. I've just pressed these pieces, and these pieces will go back into the collection. They are not wide enough to make this work, and because I pulled it from a fat quarter, it's not going to, I don't have enough. So you can see I've got a bit of a wow going on, but I think this is going to be okay when I sew my wider borders on. So I'm going to cut, I have cut 2 pieces that are 4.5 inches off of this, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing that we just did on the yellow one with this to rescue this block. So this is the final rescue block, looking much flatter, much less wavy. I would have loved to have had these polka dots continue, but such as life and quilting. Still a little bit of a wow here, but I'm all right with that because ultimately it's flat, it's square, and I'll be able to incorporate it into the final project. Then we have the one that we worked on together, this yellow one, which is beautiful, nice and flat and square. And then finally, this one that I showed you at the beginning of the video with this beautiful indigenous fabric border in here. Thanks very much for watching this video on the final border for the cat block for the community round robin quilt along. I hope you enjoyed it. It's got a little bit of a stash busting element, and it's got some tips for those imperfect sewists among us. I hope you've enjoyed it. Don't forget that you can get the patterns from my website at www.bitsandpiecesquilting.com. And I think this is the last border on the last block for this project. So the next videos will show each of us finishing our quilts and giving you some ideas as to how you might want to arrange your blocks into a final project. Thanks very much for watching, and don't forget to make the most of your fabric bits and pieces.